Ex-prisoners of Reddit who have served long sentences, what were the last few days like leading up to your release? I did a year in rehab and met a guy who did 25 years in prison for murder. I asked him a lot about what it was like inside and getting out and what it was like now that he was out. He said he felt scared when he was getting out and kind of sad because of all the people he was leaving. He'd been in that specific prison for over 8 years and knew almost everyone and had some close friendships that he missed. He felt lonely after he left and was actually glad that his halfway house was alive in year-long rehab, if felt familiar to him. He did have a lot of trouble getting work though. I asked my friend this since we are sitting at a diner. He said, you get excited and depressed at the same time. Excited for the freedom, depressed because you will have a hard time getting a job. He had been sentenced for 18 serving just shy of 13. He's doing well for himself and works on hot water heaters for a living. I did 15 years 9 MTHS. Got paroled, and I didn't want anyone to know. Too many prisoners get flopped by the parole board. I did a 6-month flop, and they get angry at the guys who get paroled. Guys will fight you just to try and get your parole taken, or some will see it as a chance to steal. Hey, he's going home. He don't need that shit, and he sure ain't gonna fight for it. I gave most of my stuff to life as long timers who didn't have family to send them money. So, the last few days were really spent trying to take up the boredom of no way to pass the time. Didn't really work about work, already had a place to live, I'm one of the fortunate ones. Just worked at keeping my head down and getting out of the gate. Paraphrased from an old friend of mine, excited but also scared and anxious. Partly because he was convinced that somehow they'd reverse his parole, partly because he was terrified he wouldn't be able to readjust. Was also afraid his relationships with his kids wouldn't be able to recover. Overall, until he actually got out, he was more stressed than excited. But the last few hours, when he realized he was actually getting out, he said those were the longest hours of his life. Simultaneously happy but also thinking, okay, they decided I get to go, why the hell can't I leave already? Said it was like taking a plane to go on your dream vacation, but the flight takes forever, there's no movie and you forgot to bring a book. Unit 26 at Parkman Penitentiary in MS is for two types of inmates: non-violent drug and alcohol first offenders and long-term inmates on their way out the door. The theory is that those long-term guys need to brush up on their social skills so they get put in with short-time non-threatening drunks and drug users. You should read The Prison Diaries by Jeffrey Archer, it's a real eye-opener. Some of the long-termers get released gradually back into society, but they struggle to deal with basic things such as using a supermarket they've had so long where every decision is made for them. Making their own decisions suddenly becomes too much to deal with. Your instincts are to lock bad people up and throw away the key, but for many prisoners this is counterproductive and they spend the rest of their lives costing the taxpayer instead of contributing to society. The prison system is broken. My buddy's dad came out of a 22-year bid. Said he misses it in some ways, been a year and don't think he's worked more than 2 days in a row. My buddy has to stay with us because of the unpredictability. On top of that, his nephew or something got sentenced to 9 years, and the circle of broken households continue. Nervous of the unknown. Didn't know where I was going to live, what town I was going to parole to after I did treatment. Being able to find a job. Just the fear of the unknown for me. Yo, you should definitely put a serious tag on this post, otherwise you're gonna have a lot of jokes and unrelated comments on this thread. Long days and longer nights. A high level of boredom coupled with an underlying excitement and fear about the future. Self-imposed limits on activities and interactions out of concern that something might happen that would affect your release. 10/10 would not recommend. Source: served 9 years between 73 and 82. I did 5 years. By that time I made it to a minimum security prison. That means a jail with no walls and no locks. You could easily escape if you wanted, but you would just be an idiot too. The days dragged on slow. I couldn't sleep for the last few weeks. I was anxious and nervous. I had plans to have all types of sex and eat all types of food, but none of my plans panned out the way I imagined they would. These walls are funny. First you hate him. Then you get used to them. Enough time passes you depend on them. Red. Super mixed emotions. Me getting out of prison was a surge of relief, sadness, worry, and nostalgic. Prison isn't what they make it out to be in the movies. If you do time in there you'll be used to being there, you'll make friends and you won't want to leave them. You also want to get the fuck out though. It's a very confusing time, especially for me. It took a long time to adjust to daily life, to be honest. I still have the mindset of alpha male etc. After being in prison, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It changes you. Rectify is an underrated TV show about this topic. You should watch After Prison show on YouTube. It will answer all your questions and even way more. I look forward to the day when our society changes the prison system to one focused on rehabilitation instead of punishment. As someone who grew up elsewhere, I see two major issues: profit motive by prison industrial complex, and the general sentiment of many Americans who view convicted felons as subhuman. Unfortunately, I don't see either issue going away anytime soon. I was in daze for a while as a teenager. I remember being scared of being out more so than happy. The routine, the straightforwardness of always doing the same thing every day just got so ingrained into me I didn't know what I was going to do when I got out. When I had got out before I would always go back to the same thing, but I wanted to do better this time. I was lost for a bit and thought I was going straight back to it, but I have a wife and 3 kids now and I'm doing great. I did 14 months in a county jail. The days were long. I played a lot of cards, chess, and I made everyone laugh, including the cops. Honestly, jail saved my life. The days leading to processing out was weird to say the least. I hadn't seen the sun in so long. The weirdest thing was using silverware. I went to eat at a dentist that morning and my eggs tasted like metal. I didn't know what the fuck, and then it dawned on me. I've only been using plastic utensils. I'm finally free. Just saw dude's post about getting out and thought he'd maybe like to share his experience. You go in as a person people around you know. After doing a stretch, even if you keep in contact when you get out, your whole family is strangers. There has been births, deaths, divorces, etc. You don't know these people anymore. Wondering what family life will be like was a thought on my mind. My family friend's relative just got out. He committed a violent crime. It's odd how he got over a decade of being in jail when he'd never hurt anyone, and someone who rapes someone can get off without anything happening to them and get a middle-class job. Seems very unfair. Why not just focus on locking up the sociopaths who want to hurt people and leave non-violent crimes to rehabilitation? A friend of mine said it is hard because everyone is jealous of you so they harm you, but also it is hard because it is like leaving your home no matter how bad that home may be. Close family friend spent the 90s inside for a self-defense case prosecutors pushed to manslaughter since he had prior drug offenses and was from a family the police didn't like due to a high-profile case in the 70s involving dodgy cops killing his mother. Sad really, since he was very close to our family but ended up pushing us away since he didn't want to hear about life outside prison. Minded his own business, got out, went born again Christian, and sadly died of cancer. Probably a good thread to put a serious tag on. Not a direct answer to your question, but check out the podcast Ear Hustle, it will have some answers for you. Strangely relevant username OP. Got robbed a few days before I was released. I knew who did it, but I did nothing about it because I knew misery loves company and the individual was going to be locked up for life. This is a damn good question that I would like to know the answer to as well. Just came here to say this. Our ex-cons. I dated a guy that did 19 years in prison for rape. He was adjudicated, charged as an adult, when he was 17. He said after he made parole, he went into some segregated area, I can't remember what he called it, until his release date. BC inmates would try and instigate fights or inflict harm, or even kill you, for that very reason. That somebody is getting out and it's not them. I believe he was in that segregated part for a couple of months before he got to leave. Why is your name Humping Assholes Orgy? My cousin went in for 9 years. He was one of the first to be prosecuted under new statutory laws at the time. He had just turned 18 and his GF at the time was a month or so away from 16. He came out a racist piece of seaweed. Getting busy living or getting busy dying. People try to steal your time by getting you in trouble and taking your day away. Everyone in the comments be like yes or a close friend of mine. Grab some popcorn and sort by controversial. I was in jail for 8 days and it was awful. Can't imagine having to spend years locked away. Shit's gotta be tough. Does a marriage count? They were okay. Well, they asked me what I want for my last meal. For-profit prisons have to go. I was really just tired from all the sex. It was really fun actually. I was in jail for like 15 years for doing crimes and on the last day before I got out the warden bought me a big birthday cake and I shared it with all my jail friends that I wasn't gonna see anymore. At the end of the night before lights out everybody gave me a big hug and told me how much they were gonna miss me. Nice username. After Prasansha on YouTube. Highly recommend this. Nice username OP. It was a lot of doing with less than you had before because you give everything away. Like circle jerking with a uniform and Care Bear under a warm sunny summer sky with the breeze making a sort of whirlwind helping the circle jerk session ever so slightly. Full stop. Full stop. Sopra. People want whatever commissary you haven't finished. I did 2 years. The last month was nerve-wracking. The last night in that cell was the best I've ever felt just counting the minutes down. Not me but my uncle served 22-23 years for a crime of reading a poetry. I don't really got to ask him how he felt but from my perspective it was very stressful and I was a little too much impatience. First of all, we weren't really sure that he'd be released and we couldn't also believe THST they'd let him go considering how racist and ignorant the judge was. And secondly when we were indeed sure the wait took like another 20 years for us. But when he got out everything was already forgotten. I stared at my PS4. Till no Redditors have been to prison. I don't have an answer, but holy hell that you. My dad pulled a few years in the state prison and from what I hear, people are usually pretty quiet about getting released. My dad knew a guy that said he was gonna be released in 3 days and would not shut up about it at all. Same guy got beaten for those 3 days. I'd assume people that have 5 years or more wouldn't like to be reminded of how far away their release is. I didn't know Reddit had a prison. Probably too late to this thread, but everyone should check out the newest episode of the Ear Hustle podcast called Kissing the Concrete. Ear Hustle is a podcast produced inside San Quentin State Prison and their latest episode is about exactly this. Don't have a comment just dropped in to say great username OP. Honestly I just wanted to hide from the other inmates. I stayed up in my cell all night just pounding books away. I read the entire available Gone series in like 3 nights. Get up for meals and lock myself in my cell all day to sleep. I don't think it was a conscious decision because I was due to stay for another 2 months or so but the guards couldn't figure out the math and let me go a little earlier than good time would account for. It's weird to think about the people I knew in there who I'll never see again. I hope those guys figured themselves out. I did a year in rehab and met a guy who did 25 years in prison for murder. I asked him a lot about what it was like inside and getting out and what it was like now that he was out. He said he felt scared when he was getting out and kind of sad because of all the people he was leaving. He'd been in that specific prison for over 8 years and knew almost everyone and had some close friendships that he missed. He felt lonely after he left and was actually glad that his halfway house was alive in year-long rehab, if felt familiar to him. He did have a lot of trouble getting work though. Well, this was my friend Andy Dufresne, on the night before his release. And he did like he was told, buff the warden's shoes to a high mirror shine. The guard simply didn't notice. Neither did I. I mean, seriously, how often do you really look at a man's shoes? And he crawled to freedom through 500 yards of shit smelling foulness I can't even imagine, or maybe I just don't want to. 500 yards, that's the length of 5 football fields, just shy of half a mile. capital J? Quite an intriguing question, you humping assholes orgy. The movie Shawshank Redemption is a great example of what the process could be like for some prisoners. Similar to your username, op. It's a good sample for statistical analysis. How is it not the majority when other categories are far less? I'm sure each state has its own data and could be compiled easily if one was wanting to do the research. Username is weird. Well, when Dad got arrested I was finally out of the basement and it was amazing and never smelled fresher air. My mum was in there too, she had been in there for 15 years.